and leave it for Liz, and I think we're going to answer questions after that. Thank you very much.
I hate to follow that.
I'm not the only one who's technologically.
It's not Liz.
I'm so bad. I'm not going to go up there.
You didn't do it.
I think
Well, it was fine.
It was working fine, yeah.
Is it plugged in there?
See, 1898 strikes again. There you go. That was right.
Something? Okay, that's
There you
good.
go. Good.
All right, Amanda Boswell. Karen, can you? We just need Amanda's password.
Must have timed out. Just sort of exited us automatically.
Well, I'm glad to see you all again. I was here months ago, maybe, when was that, in February sometime,
Yeah.
talking about Jim Crow, and kindly asked to come back and talk about the Wilmington 10. And I have a lot of insecurities about that because I wasn't here when that was going on, and Earl was. So, but I have been very interested in that, and I've been very interested in 1898. And I moved here to take this job at UNCW in 1992. I moved from Baton Rouge, and my husband's a musician, and one of the things that we found when we moved here is how segregated Wilmington was, especially in comparison to the way our lives had been in Baton Rouge in the early 1990s. And my husband likes to get on stage and play guitar and sing his songs, and he'd go to clubs like the Ice House and other places. And he would come home and he'd say, "Well, I don't see any black people. There's no black people." And I said, "Well, I know there are black people here." So I looked at the I said, "I know they're here," but he said, "Well, they're not in the clubs." And in 1992, they weren't in the restaurants. And I started working with Frank Ainsley, and our first honor student that I worked on was Andy Kraft. And so I started reading Andy Kraft's work. He had a summer internship at the Library of Congress, and his project was the 1898 riot. And he looked at the business directories and identified the black businesses. And I thought, I had an aha moment. Okay, now I understand why this town is still so segregated. De facto apartheid in 1992 because of what happened in 1898. Okay, now the idea is that I can find the little thing.
Oh no, this is it. I opened it for you.
Oh, you did open it for me. All right.
So I see Wilmington 10.
Good.
On blank again.
Oh no, that's on purpose, so you can't see us doing what we're doing.
Oh, look, there it is. This is wonderful. Okay. So here we go, the slideshow. I got it. Okay. I just can't see.
Oh.
Okay. So let's see. There we go. So my talk is about, it's serendipitously, in 1898, mentality prevailed. And this is a direct quote from Bertha Todd. And I don't know if you've met Bertha Todd. I know Earl and Tom know Bertha, but Bertha's been very active for many years in Wilmington, in the community in many respects, and she was recorded in a documentary by a student in film studies, Jennifer Taylor, talking about the Wilmington 10, and she said at that time in 1971, when all this went down, that an 1898 mentality prevailed. Like I said, when I came here in the early 1990s, I became quickly very interested in this because my background had been a PhD dissertation about lynching. And so I moved to this town and I discovered racial problems that I hadn't known about. You would think that somebody who'd spent most of their adult life in graduate school looking at racial justice issues would have heard about what happened in Wilmington, but it was not really in the public knowledge. Anyway, I went to, so for years I looked at this, and when I first heard about it, it was called the 1898 riot. And then I started looking at the Wilmington 10, and it changed from being called a riot to being called an insurrection. And then by 1998, the 100th anniversary of the 1898 events, it was a coup d'etat because the duly elected government was overthrown. And then we got up to 2006, and it's now the massacre because a lot of people died, at least 60, probably many more. And then in 2008, we had the statewide NAACP conference here, and Reverend Barber referred to it as terrorism, which was pretty apropos. So the ideas about what happened in 1898 reverberated through hundreds of years, over 100 years anyway, and still is with us today. So as Earl said, the thing that led to the Wilmington 10 events, which occurred in started in 1968 and still for the 10, still going on, the Wilmington 10, I'll tell you who they were in a minute, but was really the closing of Wilson High School, which was earlier referred to as Wilson Industrial High School. And as a white person who didn't live here, it's hard for me to talk about how important Wilson was, but I will anyway. It was a point of pride for the black community who was really segregated from the rest of the town, and so black students who in junior high school, which is what we used to call middle school, looked forward to going to Williston. Williston was going to be, their break, and that from there they were going to go on to be educated to be lawyers and doctors and professional people and tradesmen and all sorts of things. And there had been tremendous success for decades of Williston graduates. And when it was closed, suddenly, school was supposed to be desegregated in 1954 after Brown, but Williston was not. The schools in Wilmington were not desegregated until 1969. Williston closed in 1968. And the black students, some of whom were sophomores, juniors, and seniors, were taken from Williston suddenly and plopped into either New Hanover or Hoggard High School, which were white high schools, and Williston became a middle school and has evolved in different ways since then. But Williston was not integrated with white students coming in. The black students were simply removed and put into the white schools with basically no preparation. So this is Williston Industrial High. The building is still there. This building was built in, I want to say the 30s, something like that. There were previous incarnations of the building. But it's over on 10th Street, right by the Martin Luther King Center, still there, and still a school. But at the time, in the mid-20th century and up till 1969, it was the black high school in Wilmington and extremely important to the community. A couple of events that led up to this, whether they're coincidental or not, was that Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., was scheduled to speak in Wilmington on April 4th, 1968. That should be a significant date for people. But he was in Memphis, and he canceled the date, and so he wasn't going to come. And then, of course, on April 4th, he was assassinated in Memphis. And so the Williston students, they're still Williston High School students, at this time began protests, and then the protests deteriorated into some rioting in which some buildings were burned, and there was a need for crowd control, and that lasted for about 5 days until we got one of those April thunderstorms, and that sort of people went home because it was cold and wet and rainy. And do you remember that? He does. Good. This is the day after King was killed, and so here are the Williston students on April 5th, 1968, marching down to Thalian Hall downtown to protest the murder of Dr. King. So they left school and went and had this march and had a peaceful protest that didn't stay peaceful for very long and deteriorated into a problem for the white people who were basically in control of the town at the time still. So on July 24th, so this was in April, on July 24th, finally the schools are ordered desegregated. So in the springtime, there's Williston High School where the black students go and where they have social conscience and they're beginning to exercise their right to protest. And then in July, kind of just over the summer, when school's not going on, Williston's closed, and that fall the students are going to either to Hoggard or to New Hanover High School. Well, this is Bertha Todd, and she was a teacher and a librarian for a long time, and this is Bertha when she was at Williston, and this is Bertha a few years ago. She's one of the wisest people I've ever met, but she explained in probably a much better way than I could that when this went on between 1968 and 1971, when the Wilmington 10 events occurred, that an 1898 mentality prevailed in Wilmington. This is just some verbiage that tells us what happened. One of the things that happened is that Tim Tyson, who I think you've read, Blood Done Sign My Name, and let me also recommend Radio Free Dixie by Tim Tyson, which is really about black power in central North Carolina in the 1950s. Anyway, Tim left Oxford, North Carolina, where the events in Blood Done Sign My Name occurred. His father came and started, became the pastor of the Methodist Church here. And Tim was in junior high, and I asked him, I said, well, what was it like coming to Wilmington from Oxford, after all this stuff, terrible stuff had happened in Oxford, and then it's like out of the frying pan into the fire. And he said, my whole junior high and high school career was like a prison movie. It was just like one long prison movie. It was fights every day, cops every day, people getting hurt, beat up every day, and it was basically awful. The other part of it is that the black students who were thrust into the white schools, who had successful sports teams and clubs and debate society and all the kinds of things that upwardly mobile people might have in high school, were not really included in those kinds of clubs and activities in the white high school. So they're getting beat up, they're beating each other up, but they're also not allowed to participate in the way that they had at Williston. And they want black history, and they want other things, and they're not getting that. Also, at this time, we still have this white supremacy thing it's not just in Wilmington, it's in eastern North Carolina, and it's been the comments have been made that the problem was not so much the students, even though they were problematic, but it was their parents, mainly white parents, and a group known as the ROWP, or the Rights of White People, who began to show up in Wilmington, and they're basically a Klan-like group, if not the Klan. So in this period, when the students began to boycott, there began to be a number of arsons. There began to be people who come into Wilmington who look very much like Black Panthers and other sort of militant people coming around. And 22 buildings are bombed, and one is the school board, because the black students have gone to Dr. Bellamy and other people at the school board at the Hemingway building and asked for some relief, not to get beat up, not to have more police presence, to have more of the things that they had at Williston. And basically they're not listened to. Nobody's really sure who burned what down, but there were a lot of fires in this time period. I talked to a man who lived on Market Street at the time, and he said one night you look down Market Street and the sky would be lit up with fires. But they burned the school board building down and a number of other buildings in this time. One of the straws that broke the camel's back was that finally, by 1970, there were no black cheerleaders allowed. And so, sports were extremely important, and for everybody in high school, and to be a cheerleader was, a point of pride, and there had been a few, but by 1970 at Hoggard, there were not any. And that was sort of the final blow in some ways. So the boycott began. The whole thing, Wilmington 10 events began with a boycott of the white high schools. And the boycotts were led by people who were activists. There are a number of names that come up. One of them is a person who was very active in the civil rights movement all through North Carolina, especially in eastern and central North Carolina, is a man named Golden Franks, who's been dead for a while now. Anyway, the students, hundreds of students, went truant, and they were out on the streets, and that drove people crazy. And the buildings were burning at night, and it just was perceived as a huge social problem. And plus, there was a national Black Power movement that had been in evidence with Robert F. Williams in Monroe, North Carolina, a little bit earlier, and all people knew about this. So this was partly true. So one of the things that happened is that the black church did not really step up and give these high school students refuge, but a minister, a white minister, Gene Templeton, at Gregory Congregational United Church of Christ, decided that he would open the church. He's a white minister at a black church. And in a minute, I'll show you the geography of this because it's all very interesting because it all kind of happened right around where Manly's Press was burned down in 1898, just right around the corner. So there's St. Luke's, which is an extremely important African-American church, and Gregory, UCC, which is right across the street from that. And anyway, all this stuff sort of happened in close proximity. Eugene Templeton decides that he will open up his church and allow the black students who are sort of at loose ends to come in and spend their days, because they're not going back to the white schools, spend their days in the church. Patricia Rhodes, did you know Pat Rhodes?
I did.
Pat Rhodes was an activist who was, my sense of it, was of central importance in sort of beginning to organize these students and get something other than just you know what high school students are like, right? Just loose on the town all day long. Hundreds of them skipping school. It's kind of hard to imagine. Anyway, here's a picture of Pat Rhodes speaking with Eugene Templeton, who decides to open up the church to the white students. So this is a picture from Jennifer Taylor's work. It's in the archives, but it's used in Jennifer Taylor's work. And this is Gene Templeton, and his wife Donna was a nurse. And this is Benjamin Chavis. He'll show up in a minute. And do you know who these other people are? I'm not sure who these people are.
I don't know. No, I don't.
When you read about it, it says unidentified. He looks... anyway, this is Donna Templeton. She was a nurse. This is Gene Templeton. He's a minister. And they opened up the church and began to allow people to come in and give lectures on black history. But also and there were a lot of students in there, sometimes hundreds of students. But there were also people who came from other parts of North Carolina that were wearing a lot of black leather and raised fists, and a lot of rumors that there were a lot of weapons that were sometimes at the church at night. So people were shot. Donna Templeton developed sort of an infirmary and would take care of wounds and things. People outside the church began to blockade the roads around the church with concrete and pieces of wood and pipes and things like that. And the church was pretty regularly watched and later assaulted by what had been described as the white supremacist element. And this is in the 1970s. So as the thing heated up, as the white outcry against what was going on in the church arose, Reverend Templeton called on the UCC's Racial Justice Commission to send a facilitator to kind of organize this thing. And that person was a 23-year-old man who was an ordained minister, Benjamin Chavis. And Chavis grew up in Oxford, North Carolina, and he became radicalized. He came from a sort of a well-educated family, and he joined the church, and he was pretty well-educated. He had been an organizer in Oxford after the murder of Dickie Marrow. He